Hi there, Chased. My name is Michael, and today I want to talk to you about modern headless commerce development. Before we get into it, let's break these terms down so we really know what we're talking about in this talk. Modern. By this I mean using current technologies and techniques. For example, package managers, build automation, cloud infrastructure, and so on. And it means not being bound to outdated JavaScript libraries, for example, and not relying on old school FTP it to production type of workflows. By headless, well, we're going to explore this term in much more detail later on in the talk, but in essence, headless means API driven. It means that we're exposing a JSON API on the back end and then using that in a front end application to drive the user experience. And it means not being bound to a monolithic system whereby the back-end technologies dictate what you can do in the front end. And commerce means selling things. Pretty simple. It can be selling consumer goods, business-to-business sales, software licenses, subscription services, and so on. And it's the backbone of the entire internet. And most of you will at some point probably have something to do with an e-commerce application. And since COVID, well, e-commerce has become more and more important. So this talk is about modern headless commerce. And now that we've gotten those terms out of the way, let's see how we can do all of this with the JavaScript tooling and ecosystem that we know and love. First of all, I've got a story to tell you. This is me in my bedroom as a teenager. As you can see, this is the most 90s photo in the world, perhaps. Kurt Cobain, Teletubbies, a huge beige CRT monitor. Anyway, at that time, the state of the art in web development was Netscape Composer. And this was a web HTML editor that came bundled with Netscape Navigator, which, for those who don't remember, was the dominant browser at the time. It was the Chrome of that era. Anyway, my parents had an art shop and they asked me to build them an online store. So using my HTML skills, I built a simple site. It was a few pages, what you would call brochureware, a few product photos, and then a form that the customer could fill out where they could put in their shipping address and their credit card details, which would then shockingly be emailed to us. These were simpler times, that kind of thing went on, what can I say? Anyway, after a while, we realized that we needed an actual e-commerce solution, something where you had an actual shopping cart that people could go and click around and add things to the cart and check out. The standard stuff that we know today. But at the time, it was all new. It was the Wild West. So we did try a bunch of different off-the-shelf packages that were available at the time, almost uniformly terrible in their own ways. Some of them, I remember one was based on Microsoft Access, and they would generate pages with iframes, and it was a mess. Anyway, eventually we got tired of these substandard e-commerce packages that were available. So I decided to roll up my sleeves and learn to program properly and build our own site myself. So that's what I did. I bought this book, actually a much earlier edition of this book. It didn't look quite as slick as it does now, but it was this book. I looked it up again now. And I decided to teach myself a proper programming language, PHP, and then learn MySQL to go along with it. I heard that you needed these things to make an online shop. As luck would have it, this book actually contains a chapter dedicated to building a shopping cart, which was just incredible. It was made to be. It was fate was calling me at this point. So I, of course, diligently followed this chapter and implemented the start of our e-commerce website. And I spent the next year or so building it all out. And then I've spent the following 15 years maintaining it. Yeah. So then around 4 years ago, we decided that it was time to move on. My spaghetti code had reached the end of its useful life, and we needed something modern, something powerful, something that was easy to work with. We'd reach the stage where adding a simple feature over here would break something over here and something over here, and it was very difficult to work with and really slowed us down. So I started to look. I started to go and evaluate what was around now. I mean, it's been, 15 years since the last time I had a look. Things must be better, right? And indeed, yeah, the things had come on a long way. This is what I found. There was a ton of different open source e-commerce frameworks, many options, and plenty of solid options. But after digging around and doing lots of evaluation, I was still somehow underwhelmed. For a start, a lot of these frameworks are built on PHP. And now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with PHP, but by then I was most comfortable with the JavaScript ecosystem and the whole tooling around that. And besides, I'd been infected with a TypeScript virus and was unwilling to go back to anything else at that point. Anyway, this is where an idea started to form. What if we could have a truly modern commerce framework, one that works with the latest technologies and architecture? One that would be a pleasure to use and would be accessible to those millions of JavaScript developers out there. This idea eventually became Vendure. Vendure is a project that I've been working on for around 4 years now. It is a headless commerce framework. And in this talk, I want to show you how powerful and accessible commerce development can be with Vendure. Before we get into that, let's take a deeper dive into this headless thing, because this is a really important part of the whole deal. So let's talk about headless. As I mentioned before, headless is another way of saying API driven or API first. And I think it's probably best understood by comparing it to its counterpart, which is kind of the traditional way of doing things. So let's take WordPress as a really great example of the traditional way of building dynamic websites. So in WordPress, you've got a database and it's got all of the text content and the metadata about your blog posts in it. And then you'll also have a set of templates or a theme which contains like the visual layout and the styles for all your pages. So then when a user requests a page on your website, WordPress will grab that blog post data, shove it into the template, and then it's going to serve this completed HTML page to the browser. This architecture is sometimes known as monolithic, and that's because it's using a single system to handle everything, the whole stack from front to back. So let's contrast that with headless. Well, WordPress can be run as a headless system as well. And in this setup, the data is served directly from the database through an API, and that API would typically be like a REST API or more recently maybe a GraphQL API. And the result of that, what is actually returned from the server, is not HTML, it's a JSON object, typically JSON. And that JSON object is then used to build the final HTML page in the client. And that's usually done using a client-side framework like React or Vue or Angular or any of the 1,000 other options that they have at the moment. So essentially, we still do have templates and we're still just getting data and putting it into templates. The difference is, with headless, the templates are living on the client side rather than the server side. So you could ask, well, is this progress? I mean, haven't we just shifted things around a little bit? And that's a good question. We have just shifted the template from the server and now it's on the client, but what's the benefit? Well, there are some concrete benefits that this architecture brings. There's trade-offs, of course, but let's look at the benefits first. So the first of which you could call future-proofing. Now, let's take a concrete example here from the e-commerce world. There's a very, very popular PHP e-commerce framework called Magento. And this has been going for many years. It's huge. It's used by probably hundreds of thousands of websites now. If you build your shop on Magento, it means that the storefront, the bit the customers actually interact with, that's generated by templates inside the Magento system. And if you want to do something on the storefront, if you want to customize it in some way, you're limited therefore by the capabilities of the Magento templating engine. And this can become a problem if you consider that, you know, a successful e-commerce application could have a long lifespan. It could be around for 5 years, 10 years, in our case, more than 15 years. And if you consider then that you're going to be building the front end, the storefront, with technologies which could be 5 years old, could be more than 5 years old, you can see that there might be a problem here. So, you know, imagine you as a JavaScript developer here in 2022, we've got so many technologies and everything's great, ECMAScript 2022 and, you know, Babel and TypeScript, and you're forced to use jQuery and Knockout.js and Require when you want to build your storefront. So this can be a problem. And now I want to make clear, I'm not trying to pick on Magento. They are definitely trying to modernize their approach and embrace headless and so on. I just pick it as a typical example, and it's a very successful example. So when you use a headless approach, you know, you've got your storefront. If you want to rewrite it, you can do that. You can do that without even touching the server. You can create a new website every 2-3 years and incorporate all the latest trends and technologies if you want to do that. And it's completely decoupled and independent from the backend, and that's the key point here. Next benefit is the idea of being composable. What I mean by this is that you can take different services at the back end that all expose APIs, and you can bring the data from these different systems together in the front end. So a very typical and common example from the commerce world is to use a headless commerce API to handle like product data, orders, customer management, and so on. And then also use a headless CMS such as like Strapi or Sanity or Storyblock to handle the content. So it could be powering a blog post, it can even be enriching your product data, and it can be linked together seamlessly by the front-end application. And thirdly, we've got the idea of being multi-channel. So headless architecture makes it really simple and it's almost like a logical extension of the architecture to be able to build many different front ends from a single backend. So in e-commerce, for example, this could be your website, a mobile app, maybe 2 mobile apps, and even like a point of sale device, which you can use in store. And that means you can write your website with JavaScript, you can have your mobile app in Swift and Kotlin and maybe even C++ for your point of sale device. The server doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the server what you're using on the front end. The server doesn't know and doesn't care. And when you want to change those front end technologies, the server doesn't have to change. And that's the key point. So that's the theory of headless. That's the selling point. I suppose, to be fair, I should talk about the downsides, because in any technology choice, there are trade-offs. So the real trade-off with headless is that it's also the strength is also the weakness, right? Because you need to build the front end. You can't just have an out-of-the-box front end that's generated by your back end. That's the whole point, is that this doesn't happen anymore. You need to be responsible for creating the front end applications, and that can be some upfront work. But I'll also cover how we can make this easier a little bit later on in the talk. So enough of all that theory. Let's take a look at how to build something. One theme I'm going to come back to again and again in this section is the idea of developer experience. I've had my share of time working with difficult systems that are not fun to use and are not productive to use. I've also heard the cries for help from e-commerce developers working with old systems, which they found very frustrating. So I've made it a primary goal of Vendure to be fun and productive and easy to work with as much as possible. So in that spirit, let's get started, and we can use a single command for that, which is npx vendure create. We'll ask for the latest version, and we'll name our project My Shop. And this program will then allow us to just choose some aspects of the project to get it set up. We'll choose Postgres, make sure we're pointing at the right place, and let me just check the credentials that we're going to need to use here. Okay, I hope I got those credentials right. Let's use TypeScript and let's populate with some sample data. The super admin credentials we'll leave. And now we're going to npm install. As you know, npm install can take a while, so let's just wait for this bit.
5 minutes later.
Okay, npm install is done. Next, Vendure is going to create the scaffold for the project. And after that, it will initialize the server. That will involve creating the database schema and populating the test data that we asked for. And here we go, and now we're importing a bunch of test data. Okay, success. It's created our new server and it suggests that we type C my shop. Oops. And okay, yarn start. Let's do what it says. Okay, it looks like something's happening. And here we see Vendure server is now running on port 3000. So that was it. We've got a full headless server running now locally, and let's just check it out. So one thing that Vendure comes with is a web app that we can use to explore the API. It's known as GraphQL Playground. Oh yeah, one thing I didn't explicitly mention is that Vendure uses GraphQL. Let's make this bigger. So GraphQL is a way to get data from an API. I'm not gonna go into depth into GraphQL. I will explain by showing right now, but you can think of it, if you're not familiar with it, it's an alternative way to REST for querying data from an API. It has different trade-offs to REST. I find it very nice to work with, and this is why I chose to use it with Vendure. So let's do a simple example. We're using the shop API, which is what you would use to build your storefront. And okay, a typical thing you want to do is get a list of products. So to do that, we write a query. So right here, we're in the GraphQL Playground editor, and we can start working on queries. One nice thing about GraphQL is that it is statically typed. That means that the GraphQL server can tell you the entire schema. That's all the data that's available, all the things you can query for, all the changes that you can make, and the various types that are returned from those operations. So a bit like using autocomplete in an IDE, I can ask it, what are the queries available? And I get a nice list. I can start typing for products, and I can see this is available. I can see that I can pass it some options as an argument. And what are the options? Let's move that out of the way. Okay, I can do some pagination. So let's take 10, and then we want to select the items in the list, and each item is it's got a bunch of different properties because each item in this list is an actual product. Well, let's get the ID, let's get the name, let's see what else we can get. Oh, okay, we can get the featured asset, which is the image, and we'll want the preview. Oh, we can also get the width and the height, it seems. That can be useful for optimizing our front end. Okay, and let's run that query, and we'll see that we get back a bunch of items here. There should be 10 of them, and we've got the name, and we've got the featured asset, and we've got the width and the height and the preview image URL. So hopefully you've noticed here that there's a correlation between the shape of my query and the shape of the data that's returned. And that's one of the really nice things about GraphQL, is that you can specify just the fields that you need. So if you want to get just the ID and the name for a simple list, you don't need the whole product object for each item in the list. That's something that's known as overfetching, fetching too much data over the network and then only using a tiny little amount of it, and that's wasteful. So GraphQL allows you to just choose what you want. So let's say if we want to add, just to prove it, we want to add the updated at, and we want to add the slug. And now let's rerun this, and now you see straight away we've got those fields that we've queried. And just to show you the other side of the equation here with GraphQL, we've got mutations. Mutations are used to change data rather than just query for it. So typical mutation you would want to make is add item to order. That's what we're here for after all. So it wants the product variant ID. Let's just give it number 1. I think that is an expensive laptop. So therefore we will buy 3 of them. Why not? And let's see, okay. And we've got to do a little bit of a fancy syntax here because it can return a few different types of results. But if it returns an order, I want to get the ID and the order code, and maybe let's get the state of the order, and we probably want to know the total with tax. That will be enough for now. Oh no. Let's add the order lines just to make sure we're buying the right thing, and get the line price with tax, and we can also find out what product variant constitutes that order line. We'll just get the name of it, just to double check we're ordering the right thing, and it should be a laptop. So let's try it. Here we go. So now we've got our return value, which is the order. There's our order code, and in our order lines we have a 13-inch laptop, and that's the price. Very good. Okay, so that's just a very quick primer in GraphQL. That's all I will do for now. GraphQL is great. Check it out if you've not used it already. Okay, so let's now look at another aspect of this. So that's the API. Of course, that is the important thing in a headless system. It's all about the API. That's where everything happens. But it's not very convenient to just work with an API all the time. We don't, as an administrator, if I'm running a shop, I don't want to sit there typing text into the playground and just reading JSON. That's not a fun way to work. So to handle that, we ship an admin UI. So this is like a dashboard where shop administrators can go and manage the orders and the stock and the customers and all this kind of stuff. The typical things that you need to do to run a shop. And this is a plugin that we bundle. So we can head over to that right now and have a look. Let's make that smaller now. Let's log in with those super admin credentials that we set up at the start. Okay, and here we're in. Here we can see a dashboard. We don't have any orders yet, of course, but we can look at all the products. I think we've got about 80 products or so in the sample data. Let's drill down into this laptop that we bought. We can see we've got typical things you would have: name, slug, description, images. We can attach more images if we want. And then we have variants, so the different sizes of laptop, the different color of t-shirt, different size of shoe or whatever. These are product variants. Okay, we can also take a look. Let's discard those changes. If we take a look at the orders, we'll see here is the one that I just made. It should have 3 laptops. That's right, that's all working as expected. We can manage our customers. We don't have any customers yet. Let's make one. Let's make my customer. Okay, that's me. And then of course there's all the various settings that you would need to run a shop, like the payment methods, the shipping methods, tax, lots of fun, countries, and so on. So that's the admin UI. Now let's take a look at what it's actually like to develop with Vendure. So since developer experience is a top priority, Vendure tries to make it as easy as possible to extend the basic setup to fit your requirements. E-commerce apps tend to be really varied in their requirements. Every business is different and they all have their unique requirements and workflows that need to be accommodated. So Vendure tends to take a very minimalist approach while allowing you to customize it to your exact needs. Let's take a concrete example. Let's say that we want to support customer avatars. We want to allow customers to associate an image with their profile. This is not something that's supported out of the box by Vendure. So let's just take a think about what it actually means to add that support. So we're talking about changing the customer model to add an avatar property. We then need to make some kind of relation between the customer and the image file, or in Vendure we call them assets, so some relation between customer and asset. We need to extend the API so that we're then able to query that new field. We also need to update the API which allows us to mutate the customer object so that it can now accept an avatar image. And finally, we want to be able to view the avatar in the admin UI. We want to be able to see what's there, and we may even want to be able to edit the avatar from the admin UI. So that in itself is a lot of work if you really start to think about what it actually would involve to implement all this manually. There's quite a lot to it. Okay, so let's see how that is actually implemented in Vendure. Let's stop the server. Let's open up an editor so we can actually start looking at the code. It's opened in my other window. Let's drag it over. Here we go. Put you over there. Okay. So here is our Vendure project. This is what was installed when we ran that npx command. And as you can see, there's not really much there. There are a bunch of the typical files that you find in the root directory, the lock file, the package JSON, and the actual source of the project itself is just 3 files. 2 of them contain less than 10 lines of code. And this one is a config file which contains the bulk of what there is in this project. And even itself is under 100 lines of code. So the key thing that we want to do is that we want to add a custom field. And to do that, we would use this field right here, this config property custom fields. Now, because this is all TypeScript, we're able to get autocomplete and see at every stage what we can enter as a config value. So in this case, we want to add a custom field to the customer entity. And that will then want an array of definitions for those fields. So we want to, well, first of all, we'll give it a name. We'll call it avatar. And each custom field needs a type. I can just show you, these are the different types. We can have booleans, date times, floats, ints, and so on. But in our case, we want a relation because we want to relate it to a different entity. And when we have a relation, then we'll need to define which entity we want to relate that to. And in our case, we want to relate it to the asset entity. This is one of the built-in entities in Vendure. Let's see if there's anything else we need to fill out here. Okay, I think the rest we can leave. And with that, let's restart the server. Now what's going to happen here as a restart is Vendure is going to basically, those 5 tasks that I listed out before, Vendure is going to do all of them automatically. It's going to modify the database, add that relation, it's going to update the API, and it's even going to update the admin UI, which we will see. First of all, let's check in the shop API. I think if I just refresh that, it will get an updated schema. And let's take this away and take a look at the, let's say, active customer query. That should return a customer type. And if we look down here, we hopefully will see custom fields. And if we open this up, we should hopefully see an avatar field. And then if we open this up, we can get the, and let's see, we want the preview image of that avatar. So if I run this now, it should be empty, it's null. But let's go back over to the admin UI. Now I'll jump back into the record for the customer that I set up before, which is me. And we will now see there is a new section here, custom fields, and we have avatar, and we have a asset picker right here where we can pick an asset. In fact, we can upload an asset. So let's pick an asset. Here's a nice one. That is me. That's my avatar. And let's add it and update it. And let's do a test now, huh? So if we want to see if that's working in the API, well, first of all, we'd have to log in. Now, let's see if I can remember how to do this. Well, I can just let the IntelliSense guide me. So we have the username, which I believe I did it like this. And the password, I think, was the super strong test. Okay, and let's say let's see if this works. Okay, it looks like I logged in, and now we should be able to query the active customer. And we will just get, let's get the first name and the last name just to double check that it's actually me. And then we will get the custom fields and the avatar, and we want the preview image. And there we have it. That's the file right there. Let's just double check. It's got a big number. And yeah, that's the one. So there we go. So let's just review. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code. 7 lines of code with very generous new line policy from PROIDEA. So actually, we could probably just call that 1 line of code to do all of this. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about how can we make the developer experience really seamless. And this idea extends not just to things like this, but the whole plugin-based architecture of Vendure. This allows you and it encourages you to really modularize your code, to take one feature, wrap it into a plugin, which you can then use internally in your project. You can even then easily publish it to NPM and share it, which a growing number of people in our community are doing. We've got quite a healthy plugin ecosystem building up at the moment, as well as a bunch of officially supported integrations with things like Elasticsearch, S3 for storage, payment gateways like Stripe and Braintree, and so on. Now, as far as we've come in just 20 minutes or so, there is one huge piece missing in our full stack headless commerce story, and that is the storefront. And as I mentioned before, this is one of the trade-offs with headless architecture. While you have the freedom to use any front-end technology you like, you actually have to build it. And I'm sorry to say that e-commerce applications can be complex. There can be a few things you've got to figure out and get right if you want a really good user experience, which is what customers expect these days. But we can make that task a lot less daunting. Vendure has ready-to-go integrations with many popular frameworks like Next.js, Gatsby, Angular, Vue Storefront, and we're also working currently on integrations with Remix and SvelteKit, and there will be others to come, I'm sure. The JavaScript ecosystem never sleeps. Anyway, of these integrations, Vue Storefront is one of the most advanced, and it has a large community around it. It's backed by a big company, and the Vendure Vue Storefront integration is very healthy. It's led by Jakob from the Vue Storefront team. So to finish this whole talk, I'd like to give a demo of how easy it is to get up and running with a storefront by plugging in Vue Storefront to Vendure. So let's take a look at how that would work. So let's take a look at the docs. I guess that's a good place to start. So this is the documentation for the Vue Storefront Vendure integration. And I think if we look down to the Getting Started guide, we'll see. First thing it wants me to do is install globally the Vue Storefront CLI, which I believe I have already done. So I'll skip that bit, but let's open a new tab here. And let's just see what it wants. Okay, VSF init project name. Let's go here, VSF init, and let's call it my storefront. And the idea with this VSF init command is very similar to the Vendure create command. It's going to take us through some questions. What integration do we want? And let's use the Vendure one. And then it will, okay, that's much faster. It's set it up already. So let's take a look inside there. My storefront. And let's open that up in our code editor. And you can see it's scaffolded this out already. I think we have to install the dependencies ourselves. So let's just do that. And while that's running, let's just take a look at the next steps. Oh yeah, okay, so we do have to install, we've got to run yarn dev. I think there is a little bit of configuration we need to do. We want to set this up in Vendure. So while that's installing, let's just go over to Vendure and change our token method, and let's use bearer token rather than cookies. That works better with Vue Storefront at the moment. And what else do we need to do? We need to set up an environment file. Okay, let's do it manually. Where is the end example? Copy, paste. Let's rename it just to .env. And we're pointing our GraphQL API and a token method setup. That looks like it should be okay. Okay. I think once the npm install is finished, we should be able to then run yarn dev. So let's keep an eye on this. And npm install is just about to finish. And there we go. Oh, no, it's another loading bar. Is it done now? Building fresh packages, always very important to keep them fresh. Waiting, yes, yes, I'm aware. Okay, done. Perfect. So now, in theory, we should be able to run yarn dev. And let's see what happens. So let's jump over to localhost, port 3001. And see what we got. All right, something's loading. Looking promising. I can see right up here we have what looks like the right category names. Let's check if we've got the laptop that we bought before listed out here. Okay, right here. So there we have it. These are our products being pulled right now from our local Vendure server, being pulled into Vue Storefront. And we have, you know, a really nice, fast, slick looking storefront experience, completely headless, everything full stack set up in, you know, 20 minutes or so. And that's what I mean by making this kind of development accessible to JavaScript developers, to any developer, quite frankly. And let's just make sure it's working by adding one of these to the cart. This time we're going to get a 15-inch, and let's see if we can get a bit more RAM this time, because things are running a bit slowly on my computer right now. I want a bit of a faster one. We've got something in the cart there, and if we jump over to our orders here, we should have been logged out. Let's log in again. Jump over to orders, and we should see we have another active order, which is from a guest user, and there should be one laptop, 16 gig, 15-inch. There we have it, just to show that everything actually is hooked up as we expected. So that concludes my talk on modern headless commerce with JavaScript and Node.js. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch. By all means, check out the Vendure project. If you have an e-commerce app you need to build, then take a look. You might find something that you can use. There's my Twitter handle. If you have any comments for me, I want to get in touch. I'm open to any kind of questions or feedback that you have. And thank you very much. Dziękuję bardzo.